So I would like to welcome everybody to another. As you may know, the STEP project aims to enhance the research capacity of IPB in the STEP and ADI domains. So today's talk is perfectly aligned with this vision. It deals with an issue of global impact, as it is how to feed 8 billion people, the role of STEM in addressing this global challenge. So it is a pleasure to present our speaker and colleague, Professor Joana Amaral. I'm going just to, she has a very impressive CV. I'm going to do just a summary. So she's a coordinator professor at IPB, research member of CIMO. She has a degree and PhD in pharmaceutical sciences. As a result of her scientific activity, she's author of over 100 Scopus articles. She has an H index of 39. She's also an editor-in-chief in the Journal of Foods. And also in 2023 and 2024, she was among the highly cited scientists worldwide, according to the Stanford University ranking. Also in Portugal, she is the president of the Food Chemistry Division of the Portuguese Society of Chemistry from a period from 2009 to 2012. And in 2021, she was elected chair of Food Chemistry Division of the European Chemical Society. So she will talk about this issue, and that is also related with some of her research interests, as they are foods, and the development of methodologies for food authentication and detection of food fraud. So it's a pleasure to have her with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Olga, for the nice introduction. And also, of course, I would like to thank the team of STEP, and in particular to Professor Olga and Professor Fatima, that give me this challenge of talking a little bit about the broad thematic. So just for informing the participants, I will not address specific research topics or technical issues, but I will try to give a more broad vision about this challenge that is, we have a lot of people living in this only planet, and how can we feed such a high number of persons in the future. So first I will try to speak a little bit about this global challenge, and then just give some few examples of approaches that we can follow to address this challenge. And so we can see here in this chart that currently we are over 8 billion in the planet, and according to the estimates of the UN, this is only with a medium growth estimates. In a couple of decades, we'll be more than 10 billion people in this planet. And one of the things that studies show is that with a growth population, generally this growth will occur in developing countries. And as in the past, this means that probably we'll have a high number of people that will move from rural areas into the cities. And with urbanization, generally people also have more improvements of their incomes, and also they will be open to other experiences. For example, probably the consumption of fish and of meat will be higher if they have the availability to go to supermarkets and find this kind of food. And therefore, probably consumption patterns of these people, because they will have access to new experiences. Some of us also nowadays have access to gourmet experience and so on that we did not have in the past. And so consumption patterns may change. But even if we maintain the same consumption patterns that we have nowadays, we estimate that probably with increasing population, we will need to produce more 15% of food compared as nowadays. And so we can think, okay, we are going to be more people. So the solution is just to produce more food to more people. But this is not so straightforward because food production also have its impacts. For example, if we think, okay, we will have more people that would like to have meat, we have to increase animal production in processing, and this is directly related with the increase of greenhouse gases emissions. And we can think, okay, let's go for agriculture and let's have more plants produced. But then we have to think that we are competing for natural resources, such as land. We need more water, we need more energy. And so it's not also so easy to just think, okay, let's have more plant production. At the same time, land is really a problem because generally, and we are seeing this in several regions in the world, we are seeing that big forests are being taken down, and this implies that we have less trees, impacts on climate change, and also loss of biodiversity to have more land for pasture and for agriculture. And this also means that in a few years, probably these lands will have soil degradation. And we can think we can also turn our eyes to the ocean and have more fish. Yes, but then we also have the risk of depletion of fishery resources. And so just thinking, let's increase food production to feed more people, this is not so straightforward because we can have really impacts also in the planet with this. Another thing we have to consider in this challenge of feeding such a high number of people is the fact that several studies suggest that the current production should be sufficient to feed the world's population that we have nowadays. But if we look to this graph, we can see that we still have a lot of people that are facing hunger nowadays. And despite the decrease that we had in the last years, which is very good, unfortunately, we see here an increase that is associated with COVID time. But on the other side, we also have, especially in the global north, in the more developed countries, we also are assisting to a lot of people that are becoming obese. And especially in the high-income countries, this is also affecting children and adolescents. So at the same time that we have more than 700 million passing hunger and a lot of people that do not have sufficient access to vitamins and minerals, on the other side, we also have almost 2 billion of people that overeat, and we have a lot of people that are becoming obese. So what happens is that with the current food systems, and when I talk about food systems, I am meaning the whole chain from production to processing, distribution, the part of commercialization, consumption, and then also the waste that is generated. The current food systems, they are unbalanced, not only in distribution and consumption, as we just saw, with many people that do not have access to enough food, and on the other side, to a lot of people that eat too much, and with diets that are rich in sugar, salt, fat, and meat. And these kind of diets are frequently associated with a higher risk of diseases, such as diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. But also, this type of diet has impact in the environment. We are having our natural resources under pressure. And at the same time, if we look to the average of the diet in the world, we see that we have, in fact, a low dietary diversity. And why? Because most of our diet is just based on 5 animal species for meat production and on 12 crop species regarding the plants. And this is also a little bit problematic because, as I will show next, imagine if we have some kind of disease affecting animals or some pests that like decimate a whole species, this will have a really big impact in our diet and all across the world. And of course, we cannot shut down our eyes that we have a lot of food waste currently in our food system. So if we are thinking on having a sustainable food system in the future, our systems need to change. Why? Because we are expected to be much more in a couple of years, so we'll need more food to feed so many people. But we need to address this challenge not by using more land or more natural resources. By the contrary, we are already using a lot of land to produce food from agriculture and from pastures for animals. At the same time, we need to go further. We need, at the same time, trying to lower the green gas emissions that we have currently associated with agriculture. So overall, we need to transform the food systems by having changes in the production, processing, distribution, and of course, in consumption, so we can have more healthy foods that are produced with less environmental are more sustainable. So what do we need? We need more food. We need better and healthier food. We need to produce this food in a more sustainable way. And of course, we need to produce it with less waste. And how can we respond to this challenge? Well, of course, there are many ways we can think, and I will try to focus mainly on those that are related with science and technology. But I have here several options. Of course, there are plenty more, but of course, we need to increase food production. But trying to have technology helping us, for example, with precision agriculture and engineering and technology can have here a really great impact. For example, by improving irrigation and saving water, we have to improve the crop yields so we can have more food being produced. And we also must think about climate change. For example, revisiting old and traditional cultivars and varieties that sometimes are only stored in germplasm banks, but can have better adaptation to climates that are becoming more dry and can have a better yield in these scenarios. Of course, we must improve the distribution, access, and consumption so we can have a better equality in the food distribution across the world. And this is a little bit different if we think about the underdeveloped or the developed countries. Of course, in the underdeveloped, we should think on reducing food poverty and food insecurity. On the other hand, we should think also on ways to reduce food waste. We need to switch to healthier and more sustainable diets. And I will give some examples that we can have science and technology working for this purpose. We need also to protect and restore natural ecosystems, to increase the supply of fish. And this means we should improve aquaculture practices that are not so sustainable currently. And we also should improve wild fisheries management so we can have, for example, regions that are protected from fish, and we can restore the natural stocks of fish in the ocean. And of course, we need to have technology that allows for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And so my purpose is just to, now that we have more or less framed the problem and this global challenge, try to show you some examples where science and technology and also engineering and mathematics can contribute to at least mitigate the problems that we have in the planet and to answer this challenge of having more food produced for more people that is expecting to be in the planet. And so the first point is to reduce food waste. And you can see here this map And you can see here these two colors, because food waste is not only the food that we discard at our homes, because we buy too much, we do not eat everything that we buy, and then some food ends in the garbage, but we also have to consider food loss. And this happens during all the chain of the production, the harvesting, the distribution that are associated also with loss of food. And you can see in this map that the food loss is mainly associated with global south. So more underdeveloped countries, because they still do not have the technology, for example, for refrigeration, for distribution. They do not have the technology so advanced as we have in the more developed countries. And therefore, in the food chain, they have inherent losses. But on the other side, we see these orange circles much bigger in developed countries. So there is a lot of food waste, not only across the food chains, but also associated with the consumers at our own homes. And technology can give here a contribution, because it is estimated that up to 35% of fresh fruits and vegetables are lost due to spoilage, mainly because of microbial spoilage, for example, rotten food with fungi, but also because vegetables can become dehydrated, and so they will not have an appealing aspect, and generally they are easily discarded, and we just buy new ones. So in this case, the use of edible films, edible coats for vegetables or for fruit, they allow to extend the post-harvest shelf life of food, and therefore we will have more time these products in the supermarket shelves, and giving more time for consumers to still buy it and consume it at home. So you can see here that generally these films, they are polysaccharides, so they are perfectly edible, they are biocompatible, they are not toxic, they can eat them, and they provide a semi-permeable barrier to gases and water vapor, so they will retain moisture. The vegetable will become, with a nice aspect, much more longer, and at the same time, they will restrain the exchanges of gases, and so vegetables and fruits will be good for a longer time. You can see here, this is from a company that is producing and selling this technology, and you can see here a mango with the example of the non-coated fruit and the coated fruit after 15 days. And you can see that in this left side, we have still an appealing mango that is ready to be bought by consumers, and still good for consumption. So probably this is also good for consumption, but nowadays we live in a society where we want to have everything pretty and nice for consumption, and we can give sometimes ourselves the luxury that we should not, to just opt for the visual attractiveness. Also, these polysaccharides, they are being used to produce biopackaging. And here is another example of products that are already on the market. This is another company. In this case, they are using the polysaccharides that they extract from seaweed. And this is approved by the Food and Drug Administration in the US. And they produce this biopackaging. So they are perfectly compatible with food and approved for food use. They are totally biodegradable. They allow also to extend the shelf life of the foods. And at the same time, we are avoiding using the plastics, and therefore the footprint, the ecological footprint, is lower in this kind of packages. So moving to another point, the part of food insecurity that I was mentioning in the past slide. And just for the ones who are not very used to this part of food research, food security is not the same as food safety. When we talk about food safety, we are talking about pathogens that can cause disease. When we talk about food security, is different. We are talking about the populations having access to sufficient and affordable nutritious food. So we are talking about populations that do not live in fear of not having enough food in the next day. And to promote food security is also important to promote food diversification. As I was telling, if we only rely mainly in 5 species of meat, imagine that we have some pest or some disease that completely decimates one of these species. Imagine the impact that it will be for economy, for food worldwide. So food security is also related with food diversification. And regarding the part of plants, one of the strategies could be looking back to our ancestors and include more in our diet wild edible plants. And I have here 5 examples. These 2, the nettles and wild radish, they are plants that used to be consumed in Europe, like in the past century, but nowadays they are no longer used. So, for example, in the times of the world wars, where we had famine across Europe, these were 2 species that were consumed mainly in the rural areas because people had it and have access to this kind of plants and they use it for food. Nowadays, there are some chefs, for example, with the nettles, they are developing new gastronomic dishes and trying to put back these species again in the dishes of the persons. And these 3, they are from South America. We have studied them because of collaborations we have with Brazil, but they are still used, especially Brazil is a very large country, and so they have cities that are overcrowded with people, but they are also have rural areas where they still have these kinds of plants being consumed. And for example, this is like small cucumbers, these ivy gourd, they grow wild, but people also have them in their gardens to collect them and use it directly in salads or for other dishes. And although we have now, at least in Europe, chefs that are trying to put back this on our diet, also it's very important to stimulate or to convince people to consume these plants, to have data about them and to show that nutritionally they are similar to what we have in the supermarkets, and also due to their composition they can have a good impact in our health. And I apologize for the colleagues that are seeing this table because it is in Portuguese, but these are some of the species that were in the previous slide. This is the nettles and this is the wild radish. And we are comparing the part of nutritional profile with several vegetables that we have in the supermarkets, like the cabbage, the spinach, the radish, the lettuce, and here some that are wild edible plants, but more known and more consumed. And you can see that the protein levels, they are very identical. If we look to these 2, they are even better than ones that we have frequently in the supermarket. Also, the mineral profile, they are very interesting and higher than the generality of the others, as well as their carbohydrates. So they are very similar nutritionally, and we also studied the bioactive components, and they are also having very interesting profiles, for example, with compounds that we call flavonoids and phenolic acids that are generally associated with antioxidant activity, and so they are good for our health in general terms. And for this one, this comolina plant, Trapoerava, in Brazil, they also use it not only for food, but also to treat eye infections. And so we decided to evaluate antimicrobial activity and compared to these two that are used as preservatives and allowed by the European Union, we can see that the activities are even better because we have lower minimum inhibitory and bactericidal concentrations. They are even better or similar to the products that we have as preservatives in our commercial foods. So this one exhibited a very promising antimicrobial activity, which is also good in terms of avoiding food spoilage. And moving to another topic, the part of healthier and sustainable diets. Of course, when we talk about sustainable diets, everyone will talk about the pros and cons of having animal-based foods compared with plant-based foods. And of course, we all know that the production of meat is generally associated with greenhouse gas emissions. We need more land to feed the animals, and of course is one of the food productions that is associated with higher environmental impact. And that's why currently and in the last decades, many research has been made regarding the alternative proteins to meat. And I have here, for example, the plant's proteins, the use of seaweeds, the insects, and also the part of cultured meat. So for plant proteins, they are really being increasingly studied in the last decades, especially legumes. Legumes and pulses, that are the dried seeds of legumes, they are very healthy and nutritious, but they also promote sustainable agriculture. And our ancestors know that because frequently legumes were put in agriculture like in rotation of crops. And this is because, first, they do not have a very impact regarding greenhouse gas emissions. They generally need less water as compared to other crops. And very importantly, they have microbes that live in symbiosis with their roots, and they are able to fixate nitrogen from the air. And this, at the same time, increases soil quality, and very important, needs a lower amount of fertilizers. And fertilizers is also one of the things that make agriculture to have an environmental impact. So pulses and legumes, besides being very nice to be consumed by themselves, which there are several there that I appreciate very much, they are also being used, namely they are proteins, to develop new product formulations as analogs of meat. And I put here some examples that are in the market, some just in the North American market, and they are expanding to Asia. But for example, this brand, these Just Eggs, they are very known in the United States and allow you to make scrambled eggs that, at least the announced, say they are very tasty and they taste like eggs, but at least visually they are very similar. Besides the eggs, there are companies that are also producing meat analogs with plant proteins. And I know that we all associate, okay, burgers made with plants, they are not as really as good as the ones from meat, but at least this brand is also available in the US, it's not in Europe. And I really would like to taste this because they say the Impossible burgers, they are very, very similar to meat, at least is what is written. And now they have also the Impossible chicken, the Impossible pork, the Impossible sausages. And they say that the trick is not only using the plant proteins, but for example, also having as ingredient methyl cellulose that can bind water and make the things more juicy and more the feeling with the meat. And they also say that they did several studies, and one of the things that they believe gives meat the taste of meat is some proteins that have iron cofactors, that is the M group. And so in proteins in meat, we have the myoglobin and the hemoglobin, and they developed a similar protein that is the leg hemoglobin that also has this M group. And so is completely developed from proteins, I think it's from soy, and they are producing this protein via fermentation with genetically engineering yeasts, a process that is also completely approved by the Food and Drug Administration. And they say that this is the ingredient that gives their products the taste of meat. And so I should say that I really would like to go to the United States, not just for the trip, but also for the opportunity of trying one of these impossible foods and really see if they really taste like meat or not. Also, they have this, for example, this development published in peer academic journals. So it's another point that supports that probably they are really tasty. Still on the more sustainable diets, one of the things that is also being a lot of studies is the seaweeds. And the seaweeds, we have the micro and the macroalgae. Regarding the microalgae, they are now being produced in large bioreactors, and they are sources of several interesting compounds like polysaccharides, but also bioactive compounds. And they are being used, for example, with techno-functional properties to improve emulsions, to improve foods like yogurts, ice creams, cheeses, cookies, biscuits, and so on. But they are also being used with green extraction methodologies to obtain pigments like carotenoids, chlorophylls, and also, depending on the algae, phycocyanins. Microalgae is not really related with food, but indirectly it is. They are also being used and studied for their lipids in order to use them to produce a biodiesel. Well, it's indirectly related because then we are not spending lands to produce lipids that will go not for food, but for biodiesels. And of course, if we think about macroalgae, they are pretty much used to extract polysaccharides like carrageenans and alginates that are used for food technology. But nowadays, they are not just used for that. We associate algae, for example, with the sushi. All of us know the nori algae, but nowadays we have a lot of other species that are available in the supermarkets. And you can see that they are very interesting for the carbohydrates, of course. They are used to extract polysaccharides, but they also have quite interesting percentage of fiber that is very good for our gut health. And also they have quite interesting profiles of protein. So they are increasingly used, and also micro and macroalgae, they are part of several studies that are nowadays being financed by the Blue Economy project. So other examples of more healthier and sustainable diets, and of course we have to talk about insects. So insects and insect proteins, they are consumed across the world and mainly in regions of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. There are more than 2,000 known edible species of insects, including crickets, locusts, termites, and so on. And you can see here some photographs that were taken from FAO. And I really think this is very interesting. So the part of insects for the Europeans is still something that persons have mixed opinions. So we have persons that say, I want to try, and others like myself that are with a lot of doubts that I want to try it. And I cannot imagine myself going, I don't know, to the cinema, and instead of having a bunch of popcorns, having like this bunch of crickets. Yes, so it's this divide opinions. More or less like shrimps, okay. So, but I find this image very curious because in FAO, in this report, they said this is fried grasshoppers that were available for purchasing at a sport event in the United States of America. So I don't imagine like people in Portugal going to a soccer ball and having like, okay, my grasshoppers like snacks. But I don't know, maybe in some years we will evolve to this, because in fact, and I will go back, but just to say that in Europe, we have already 4 insects approved for consumption. And in fact, insects, they are pretty much studied and taught nowadays because they have advantages in terms of environmental impact. If we look to the nutritional value, and we have here some examples, they in fact are rich in protein. They also have quite nice fat content that are also calories and so also good for the diet. And interestingly, this is also published, so I have to trust this information, but these edible insects supposedly taste like sweet, like fish, like caviar, so probably they will taste very fine. At least believing in this information. So they nutritionally are very interesting, they taste good, but they are also environmentally interesting. Why? Because the quantity that we can eat from an insect is bigger as compared to other animals, but most importantly, in the insect farms, we need to spend less water. They generate less greenhouses gases, and they need much less land to be produced. So people believe that this may be one option in the future. And currently in the world, they are still mostly harvested in the wild, but there are an increasing number of insect farms and several being established in Europe. Why? Because insects, they are considered novel foods, and novel foods in Europe, they have to be evaluated by the European Food Safety Agency. And currently, EFSA has given the okay for 4 insect species, the first approved in 2021, and the most recent one in 2023. So they are approved, they are available for selling in Europe. The only thing that EFSA says is consumers should be careful if they are already allergic to, for example, crustaceans and mice, because there could be cross-reactivity in terms of allergic reactions. And you can see here some examples of brands that are selling this kind of insects or insect flour. In Europe, some products are not really the insects, but mainly the insect flour that is used for products. It's a more easy way to enter into the market. And this is a Portuguese brand. So I went to their website and they have like these energetic bars, the chocolates, the pasta made with insect flour, the insect flour, so you can cook your own biscuits and cookies at home. So let's wait and see in the future if we will have more foods based on insect flour. And one of the novelties that we have also several research being made in the last years or last decades is cultured meat. And currently there are already several companies that are really investing and getting private or government funds to do the research. And you can see here several companies that raised millions to develop this technology. And this is a very recent approved project financed by Horizon 2020 that took place, they started this year, and is about the cultured meat and also cultured seafood to develop these kind of technologies. But there are already companies, and the development has been very fast. So this guy, Mark Post, started with some colleagues to work on this, and they mainly transposed some techniques that were used in research, mainly in tissue engineering for cell cultures, and they adapt those. And I don't know if you remember in 2013 that we had this cultured meat hamburger that took 2 years to produce and cost around $200,000. And so they had the first hamburger. This appeared in the news, in the journals, and so on. And since then, several companies are developing these products. There are already companies that are selling these products, namely in Singapore. It was the first country that allowed the selling of cultured meat. Of course, this is at a very, very low level. They sell these chicken skews in a restaurant of cultured meat. It's like a tourism attraction. I think the price is not as high as this is 100 grams, but I think it's very affordable if we think what is behind. As far as I could see, this is also approved very recently in the United States. And I don't know, yes, I put it here. In this year, in 2024, there was a submission to EFSA for regulation and for approval of cultured meat. It's from a French company. They want to have cultured foie gras. And so let's wait for EFSA answer to know if this will be also allowed to be in the European market. I put here this Mosa Meat, that is the company of Mark Post, because years ago we had in the Eurofood Chem conference, the Mark Post was not present, but he sent a senior researcher that made a talk about cultured meat that was amazing. And they are progressing a lot. And they say the next step is to scale up and to have it approved in the European Union for consumption. So just like in not entering in details, but just very briefly, these uses cells that are collected from the animals. The cells are grown in bioreactors and in culture media, so they can reply and have more cells that are collected after some weeks. And then these cells can be extruded or 3D impressed to generate the products that are similar to meat. One of the things they talked about in that talk in the conference is that the challenges is to make the things look and taste identical to meat. And to that purpose, now they are using not only muscle cells, but also fat cells, and differentiate these lines differently. They need to scale up and to have an affordable cost. They said they are using food-grade ingredients and not pharmaceutical ingredients because the costs are much higher when you go to pharmaceuticals. And one of the most important things they mention is that to make this sustainable and also to make it coherent and logical in the culture cells that we do in the lab, generally we use one ingredient that is fetal bovine serum. And so it's cultured meat if the cells are grown in fetal bovine serum. And one of the things that they were able to do was to substitute this crucial ingredient and still have these cells growing and multiplying in culture media that are different. At that time, it did not mention the details because they were about to publish them in Nature Food. And so now they were able to pass forward this obstacle. And as I show, there are research projects that involve more than 30 different institutions. And I think in the next few years, we will hear more about this perspective of having cultured meat on the market. And if we talk about healthier foods, of course, we cannot escape, and we have to talk about nutraceuticals and functional foods, especially because this is like one of the hot topics that we have in our research center. We have several groups that deal especially with polyphenols, but we have a lot of other components that we can add to the food to develop functional foods and nutraceuticals. That is a term we use to describe products that have extra health benefits beyond the basic nutritional value that the foods have for themselves. And we work a lot with polyphenols that can be from several different families, and they are well studied and well established, the connections that they have in decreasing the risk of several diseases. And so its inclusion in foods, of course, is good from the health perspective, but also from the technological point of view. And I put here two examples that are from research groups of CIMU. CIMU developed an extract from chestnut that was patented. So it's one of the products that were developed by CIMU that has a lot of success, because then a spin-off was formed, and now there is this company, the Tree Flower Solution, that is exploiting this patent. And the patent is about to use these extracts to substitute sulfites in wines. And so we can have wines that also have as good technical characteristics as using sulfites, but using instead this natural extract. Also, for example, the use of colorants, of pigments that are extracted from foods and then put again in the food chain with use of natural colorants, for example, for the dough of pasta, for ice creams, and so on. And in this part of bioactive compounds, of course, it's very relevant also to talk about circular economy. So when we use the byproducts from food industry to extract bioactives that are again put in the food chain. And we have here two examples, also one from the colleagues of CIMU, and that also give a patent, where they were able to use these bioresidues from a mushroom company, and they are extracting compounds that have the capacity of lowering cholesterol, but they also did this work of this patent where they extracted ergosterol. They did modifications to this compound to produce vitamin D2 that then can be added to dairy products. And another example, especially because in Portugal we have a lot of wine production, this was with a company that produces wines, and we extracted polyphenols and especially anthocyanins from the byproducts. I did not put here, but we had also colleagues from the engineering developing a prototype that was able to do this extraction in line and automatically. And we got the extracts and, for example, include them as natural colorants also in ice creams. And still on circular economy, in SIMO, we are also developing studies where we try to use residues. For example, here, the ones from producing walnut oil. Rafael, that is a PhD student, is using the oil cake and the walnut oil drugs to study the profile and the bioactivities, in particular, the prebiotic activity. So these residues are very rich in fibers, and we did the study of their prebiotic activity. So the activity of stimulating good bacteria that we have in our gut. And we did the assays with the residues directly and with the residues after they were submitted to in vitro digestion following the InfoGest procedure. And so we got residue that is not absorbed and goes to the column, and see that after digestion, the capacity of stimulating this bifidobacteria, that is a good bacteria we have in the gut, was even better. So there are a lot, this is just an example, but there are a lot of studies concerning this circular economy where we can use the byproducts of some industries to extract age-developed compounds and put it back in the food chain. And I don't know if I am very delayed because my watch stopped. And so this is the last slide, but I really have also to show it because I think in the future, in some years, decades, probably we will be talking about this again. So this is really interesting equal to the point of increasing food production. We need the crops to generate more food while being produced in the same area. And genome editing can have a word on this. So genome editing get these two ladies to be attributed with the Nobel Prize in Chemistry some years ago. And they were able to discover these enzymes, these systems that work as genetic scissors. So they are able to do very reliable cuts in the genome in very specific sites. And so they work like as scissors, and we can edit the genome. So as far as information I could read, this is a very nice tool that probably will get more used in the future. And why in the future? Because we need to know the information, not only about genomes, because nowadays with sequencing, we can have this information, but we need to know where should we cut, what should we introduce inside the genome. So we need to know what this region serves in the genome, what does it does, so we can know how to manipulate the genome. But we already have these tools that allow us to cut and edit the genome very precisely. So in my opinion, I think this will be a great contribution in the future, for example, to increase the productivity, to make the food healthier with more nutrients, more bioactives, and with extended shelf life. So finally, and thank you for your patience, the final slide. So with the take-home messages, so what I try to show is that data says probably in some years we will be much more in the planet, and we need to increase food production to feed all the people that we'll have in the planet. And to this purpose, we need to change the food systems and food production to make it on a sustainable way. So we need to promote at the same time sustainability, healthy foods, and equity in the global food systems. This part, I think, I don't know if it will be very easy to achieve, but these would be the things we should consider in the future. Of course, there are a lot of strategies that I did not mention, but I would like to highlight these ones, namely where technology can have a real impact, that is in the increase of food production, for example, with this genome editing, but also with precision agriculture and technology engineering having a big word in this, with climate adaptation, going back to older and traditional cultivars, to enhance the access to food, mainly by reducing food waste, and technology also can play here a very important role with the intelligent packaging and so on, to have healthier diets, and here plants, insects and algae and also nutraceuticals can have a word to say. And also with the circular economy, we are seeing a lot of studies on to extract on a sustainable way value-added ingredients that we can reuse and put back in the food chain. And so thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I will be pleased to try to answer them. And I would like to thank you all, your patience for listening to me. Thank you.